Great. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Guilford Planning and Zoning Commission's working session regarding our zoning regulations rewrite. This evening, we have our zoning consultant, Glenn Chalder, joining us. Thank you, Glenn, for joining. I am Jamie Stein, town planner. We also have assistant town planner, Nigel Mills, on the phone. Thank you. And we have commission members with us as well, Philip Johnson, Kevin Clark, and Ted Sands. Great. So I think we want to get started to just go over, okay, so there's Bill. Forgive me while I also work the virtual room. I'm going to ask Glenn to kind of kick off where we are in the process of our zoning regulations rewrite. The hope is that we can have this working session, a public information meeting in January, and then move towards adoption, hopefully in March. This evening's meeting is really a time to kind of take stock of where we are in the rewrite, make hopefully some decisions, or at least offer the Planning and Zoning Commission the opportunity to consider some outstanding items. And then also kind of give the commission and the public the opportunity, Scott, to kind of see where we are in the process of really getting this over the finish line. So with that, I think I will hand it over to Scott. We're getting a few people joining, or I'm sorry, to Glenn to kind of introduce us and where we are in this process and how we're going to move forward.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jamie. Jamie, Nigel, and I discovered that we were each keeping track of different things that we felt needed to be addressed as we were moving along in the regulation project. And as Jamie indicated, we have two milestones approaching, one of which is the public meeting scheduled for the end of January. The other one is our target for public hearing on adoption sometime in March. And so we felt it was useful to start getting our concepts or ideas or things that we were tracking down on paper. Quite a lot of information has come into the commission and to Jamie as part of this process, from educational, informational meetings, et cetera, from people. And we wanted to make sure that we put these onto a list to track them. This type of format is proven useful in other communities because commission members can add things to the list and we can work our way through the list. I think tonight we've identified some issues that we would appreciate some feedback from the commission members on, so that we can keep going on the work that we're doing, make sure that we're addressing your questions or concerns. And then some of the other issues which are in the pages 2 and on, is what we're calling a staff work program. These are things that Jamie, Nigel, and I are coordinating on between us in the hopes of resolving these issues and then bringing these forward in future drafts of the regulations, et cetera. Some of these items are ministerial in a sense. They're things that we know that we need to be taken care of. So those may end up on something the functional equivalent of a consent agenda for the commission members to say, oh, okay, I see what you did. Okay. And then other items, depending on the nature of those, may end up on page 1, for example, here, which is questions for Planning and Zoning Commission working session to get additional thoughts and feedback from you. So that's what we anticipate working on. I think we're all going to take a little bit of a breath here, given the holidays, Christmas and New Year's, but continue to work away on these items and bring this forward in a set of regulations. So I think that's our work program, or what we see our work program being. Are you comfortable with that approach, with that work program? Does that make sense? No, I see Ted shaking his head. No.
No. Look, I mean, we're talking about a major change here. And I think that we are not, our schedule is such that we are not providing sufficient time for input from the townspeople. On the Board of Ed, when we would make, things like the budget or changes in policy, we had a rule that we would have at least 2 public hearings. Because, if somebody had a conflict on one day and they could come on the other. The fact that we're having this right in the middle of the Christmas holidays almost seems like we're trying to hide the
Can I
session.
get you something else?
Build a fire.
So I think that instead of having 1 public hearing, I think we need to have 2. And I really think that we need to be sure that the townspeople understand the changes that we're making here, because this is something that they're going to have to live with for a while. And I just, when I go through this list, I mean, we could be talking about some of this stuff for a long time. And I just don't think 1 public hearing is going to do it.
The only thing I want to add, respond, Ted, is that there's a couple of events coming up. The first of which, end of January, isn't really a public hearing on adoption. What it is a public informational meeting to give people an opportunity to let us know their thoughts or reactions, things that perhaps they're not comfortable or the way it's being addressed or been addressed or whatever, but it's an opportunity, I think, for the commission and for staff to listen to what people have to say so that we can make sure that we're making cogent decisions in terms of what the commission wants to accomplish with the regulations themselves.
I agree with that, Glenn, but I think that only having 1 of those is a mistake. I think we should have 2 because some people will have conflicts on that day.
Okay. And then I think the other part of your comment had to do with the actual public hearing on adoption, which is March. And that's certainly a scenario where the stakes are a little bit higher because we're moving towards adoption. And I think the commission has historically, even in the regulations, has had a provision that often defaults to 2 public hearings on an application. So I think it might be prudent for the commission itself to consider that for the public hearings on adoption. So good comment, and we'll talk about that and figure out what to do.
Yeah, I would like to mention 2 things, Ted, though, too. This process has been in play for 2+ years now. And Jamie, can you estimate how many meetings you've had with public, with various different groups around the town related to these regulations?
Yeah, I mean, it has definitely been a few. I mean, Ted, just sort of where I came from with those monthly meetings that we've been doing since April, I think, is that, we did have a public information meeting. Help me out, Scott, Bill, Phil, Glenn. That was
January of last year, we had an information.
January of last year. So almost a year ago, we had a public information meeting. And, it just dawned on me as a commissioner at that time that we had not done enough to inform the public of the major changes that we were enacting, and that I wanted to create an opportunity for at least a monthly touch base in addition to our regularly scheduled, on the first and third Wednesday of every month meeting. And so I do feel as though we have offered, many opportunities to weigh in. And so, if I had to, round it out somewhere, Scott, in addition to the monthly meetings since April, the, regularly scheduled meetings of the Planning and Zoning Commission and attending an Ag Commission and Economic Development Commission, a Tree Advisory Board meeting. I mean, I've been around town talking about this. So,
and in addition to that, prior to you, I know that both your predecessor as well as Aaron had many meetings with a lot of the same people as well that year before you jumped in on this year. So I just wanted to make sure, it's been out there. It's been out there for 2 years. It's been very loud. It's been, yes, Philip, I'll make a comment.
I'll wait for you to finish.
That's fine.
No, but I would kind of preface all of this with the premise before all this started was we're not going to be making major changes to the code. And so I think in my mind, one of the things we really need to detail is what changes are we going to be making from what was the code to what will be the code.
Yep. Thanks,
No,
Phil.
no,
That was the next part that I was going to get into
I'm
was
sorry, Scott.
it's fine. We both had the same thought. Is yeah, you're right. This from the beginning has been an overhaul of the regulation, not a change to the regulations. It's been a reorganization. It's been adding a glossary so that everyone understands the terms. And as of today, I would estimate 90+% of the regulation remains exactly the same. 95%, Glenn. I mean, is something like that. It's just been reorganized, correct?
Yeah, I think oh gosh, it's hard to say. I mean, I'm not even sure you can keep track of the number of words, the change in the number of words, et cetera. We've tried to simplify the language to clarify the commission's intent for the existing regulations. So there's been quite a bit that's gone on, but I think our mission was, as Phil indicated, originally we started with the idea about let's make what we've got clearer and reflect what our current policies are. And then as we got into it, we started looking at the business districts, the CAM requirements, and some other provisions, and tried to start to address those as well. So I'm looking back here through my file, and I think we created a summary of major changes, I believe, for the public meeting a year ago. I'm going to try to find that. And I think we should update that so that as we head for the public hearing in January, we've got a handout for people. We'll have put it on the website. It says, okay, here's the nature of the changes. And I think that'll help people.
All right, that's the challenge that I've been presenting to Jamie every time that we've talked about it as well, is trying to make this point that this is by and large, this is a reorganization and making it clear to everyone of how to operate, how to navigate through the regulations. And then here is a very clear list of the things that are actually changing. And part of that is just having gone through the reorganization, we've stumbled upon a couple of areas where it just makes sense to make a couple of changes. This isn't, I think that's the other important thing to take away, is that we're not just deciding, hey, we're going to just throw in this one change just because we have an opportunity to. It's more of as a product of going through it and as a product of talking to a lot of the different groups in town that use the regulations or that are affected by the regulations. There's a handful of things that have come up that it just made sense to discuss making some small changes to the regulations.
And I would reiterate, like, the public input has been really important. Like, for example, when we talked about ADUs, accessory dwelling units, the point that Russ campaign made was like, do you want something to be 50% and 50%, like equal size units?
Right.
I mean, just like having input from the public is really important for us, because most of us have other day jobs and we're just volunteer commissioners and trying to do the best for the town. But
yep, agreed. So yeah, so that's the plan, is to have it very clearly delineated what's the only changes that are being proposed, and that's by and large the reason for this working session. It's not that we're trying to hide it, it's just this is where we've gotten to. Like Jamie had multiple sessions related to each individual pieces of what we're going to talk about, so to gain in each of those sessions she got lots of notes from the public. And so then she's kind of collated all those things together to some of the items that we're talking about tonight.
I hear all that, but I still think that
Your point's well taken about the multiple meetings, and we can have two meetings to or deny it as well. Yes, that I don't have any problem with that.
nor do I, by the way. I mean, I think the more we like flesh this out and get it correct, the better it is.
Absolutely.
But is there time enough if we actually scheduled a second public hearing and you could still keep the March adoption date?
Probably not. It's a little tight, but
Okay,
we'll let Jamie take the reins on that.
Yeah, I don't think the March thing, it has to be a firm.
right, I understand that.
How long do we have Glenn for?
I'm working with Jamie and Nigel to make the transition of the regulations so that they're maintaining the text as we move along.
Mhm.
You know, that's just the formatting. It doesn't sound like such a big deal, but until you get into a regulation that has as many elements as this one does in terms of formatting, numbering, et cetera. So we've had great success there. We're in the process of changing the document over, all the sidebar comments, which you may recall in the various versions, which were sort of editorial and communicative to the commission. Those have been removed by Nigel. So now we're setting up the regulations to either have a just that sidebar space on the page, or we're actually talking about sort of breathing the paragraph text out a little bit, because that'll reduce the number of pages, because right now we're giving up about 15 to 20% of the page, if you will, for that sidebar comment. We're working on activating all the click links in the document. It's our intention that every page in the zoning regs will have a sidebar, that if it says, you know, see chapter 6 for this, right there in the sidebar is a click link to go to chapter 6. And actually the text is, if it says see chapter 6, that notation will be a click link. So our goal is that for commissioners in the middle of the meeting, for people who are looking to use the regulations, you can quickly get to what it is you want to know, and presumably, based on past experience, within 2 or 3 click links, be looking at the text you need to know that is directly related to the questions you're asking. And I think that's the user utility, which you haven't had a chance to see yet because we had to get the text kind of worked out beforehand. But that's one of the things that you'll see on our to-do list. The staff is tracking that. And we just wanted to let you know that we're on top of that type of stuff. Based on our conversation just now, I think a year ago at the public informational meeting, we found that the summary of major changes was helpful for people to become familiar with the nature of our process. I brought it up on my screen, had a quick look at it again, and I've made a note, Jamie, I put it on our issues list that one of the things we're going to add is to update that. And so it'll be ready well in advance of the public informational meeting, so people have a chance to see that and then decide if they feel they need to show up or they're comfortable with it, et cetera. So we're going to honor the commission's directive here in terms of a transparent process and get information out there to inform and educate people.
Thanks, Glenn. Any other general things that we need to discuss, Glenn or Jamie, before we move into your list here?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the, you know, the feeling of the planning and zoning department, you know, I've been sort of doggedly trying to stick to the March 15th adoption date. I think it's been Glenn and Nigel that have, you know, just sort of let me know that if we need to, you know, bump that a month, it's okay. So, you know, if you do feel that you would like to have a second public information meeting, that's fine. I mean, that's, you know, what we, public information meeting or a public hearing. I mean, what we have to adhere to is, you know, notifying deep. And that's something that we'd like to start fresh in the new year, you know, far outside of the 35-day notification period. We have to notify our surrounding towns and the regional planning commission. So, you know,
Is that with the draft, or is that with the final?
That's with, we would like to have it more finalized than not. I mean, I think that for deep, I feel that the CAM is, the coastal area management section is fairly well cooked. I think it's ready to go to them. I haven't really received any comments regarding that, but we can, you know, as Ted is cautioning, I mean, as a former advocate, I would get very upset when, you know, major institutions schedule things right around the holidays. So I'm not trying to repeat that right now. It just sort of happened to fall around that time. So, you know, I'm open to, you know, holding more meetings and ensuring that you know, people get to voice their thoughts and concerns.
Great.
Hey, Scott, I have a question.
Yes, Bill.
What's the main distinction between a public hearing and a public information meeting? What does it mean technically to us and the town. And it seems like they're the same, but maybe there's some nuance.
Go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah, I think, Bill, great question. An informational meeting is an opportunity for us to make a presentation to the community, for the community to give us feedback. But there's no pending action on the part of the commission in terms of adopting or not adopting the set of regulations. So it's more like an informed conversation, and people can tell us what's on their mind and what they're concerned about or what they're really supportive of and that type of thing. So it's meant to be helpful for the commission as we move forward. As was indicated earlier, there's a lot of different parts of the regulations, and moving things around makes some people nervous. And so it's a chance to kind of work that out. Eventually, we're going to get to a public hearing on adoption, and that is a formal matter that it's almost like an application by the commission to itself to actually adopt these text changes. And I imagine some map changes at the same time. The purpose of the public hearing is to get final public comment for the commission to then close the hearing and deliberate in terms of what they would like to do with the application, which could involve approval. They could withdraw the application. They could approve it with conditions. It's similar to what an application would be. So still in the conversational stage through the informational meetings. And then at the point that we give notice to the Regional Council of Governments, DEP and others, that's now we're starting the possibility of a formal adoption process. And so that's the main difference between the two.
So under Ted's scenario, then we would schedule a initial public hearing and then continue it.
Well,
the second.
I think that was. a
No,
question,
I think it'd be an informational meeting, not a public hearing.
So you're looking for two informationals. I believe, Jamie, correct me if I'm wrong, that it would be just during one of our normal meetings. It would just be during the public hearing portion of a normal meeting, or were you thinking that we were having a separate meeting just to talk about adopting?
Yeah, I would prefer a separate meeting because that
Yes.
gives us some flexibility in terms of when that 35-day comment period happens
Okay.
to manifest itself.
So in this case, we would end up with two meetings. We'd set one and then set up a second.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm understanding that Ted doesn't want two
Oh, you don't-
public hearings.
You don't
He
think we
wants-
need two hearings, Ted? Do you think we just need one hearing, but two informationals?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
You could do that however you'd like. You could do that through a regular meeting, or we could do that.
I think, yeah, again, it's what everyone,
I'd
what
be
everyone
more
thinks is,
comfortable as a separate meeting.
what everyone
and-
thinks is gonna be the most transparent.
But then that would be 3 meetings.
Yeah, that'd be three.
Yes,
The third hearing is important because if Deep wanted to come, if neighboring towns or whatever wanted to come, then it's important for them to have the opportunity as well. Okay,
Shall we move to our tracking list? Shall I bring that up and we can?
unless anyone else
Conversation?
has something else to bring up? Nope. All right, let's go.
Okay, great. So as Glenn said, this document is really us literally trying to bring the regulations over the finish line. The first page, which I will come back to, I just want to kind of run everyone through this document, which is available through the materials link on the Planning and Zoning Commission's Agenda Center website. These are sort of some topics that are still remaining for the commission to discuss and to advise on how to move forward. The second page really starts off this kind of what I have been referring to as the laundry list. During all of the meetings that I have held with different commissions and members of the public, and the letters that I've fielded and received and phone calls I've had, I was just kind of keeping a tally of all of those things. And I did for Glenn and Nigel, I did a bit of a brain dump to try to get it out of my head and into their hands for working. And so that really constitutes the bulk of this section. And we thought it was important to show this to the public. I mean, this is kind of like how the sausage is being made, right? Like these are all the things that we're just trying to grapple with. And we've tried to organize them in ways, and many of them are things that we just have to go back to and double check. And many of them are comments that we've received and things that we really need to check and understand. The third element of this document, really talks about future projects. So I think to Ted's point, at some point, we're not going to be able to just keep, updating or amending or continuing these discussions, and we have to hit a full stop point and then, commit to making changes to our regulations in future after this kind of the bulk of the work has been adopted. So we are giving some real conscious thought to, what are the things that we need to be putting into this bucket of things that will, address in future. So, now that you know kind of how we're trying to set this up in order to get everything complete, I think we can return to these questions for the Planning and Zoning Commission and start that discussion.
Who's leading this? Am I leading this, Jamie?
I think so. I mean,
Okay.
one of the things,
That's fine.
Okay, sure, go ahead.
So first on the list is inclusionary zoning. We all got sent the memo from I don't know the official name of that. It's the Affordable Housing Committee. I don't really know exactly what the official name is. Basically, they're recommending that we adopt mandatory set aside in new regulations of 10% of at least 80% AMI within the new development. So that's condos, that's townhomes, that's single family housing. Doesn't matter what kind of development it is, it would be a general requirement. As I mentioned last night, hopefully you're aware that as a state statute, where all towns are required to have, or the goal for all towns is to have 10% of affordable housing. Currently Guilford is at 2.7. And so my comment last night was if we choose the number of 10%, then you're treading water, right? If a new development came into play with 100 units and we required 10% of those to be affordable, then we're not losing any ground, we're not gaining any ground on that 2.7%, correct? If for instance, it was 20%, then every new subdivision that came into play, you'd gain some amount of percentage points on that 2.7, and in theory over time. There's other ways that we're hoping Guilford will get more affordable housing, including this, this new ADU law should be helpful as well.
Scott,
Yep.
help me understand
Sure.
what are the state regulations and what are the penalties for not being at their
The biggest
prescribed
penalty
standards?
is that we are subject to, I always forget the name of the section. Can somebody-
830G.
830G.
We're
Well,
subject to
830G allows
830G.
like a 20%, but
30%.
beyond that, like if someone walked in and said, like, I'm not walking in with a affordable housing, what are our constraints?
I'm not understanding what
All
you're.
right, I'm sorry. So are we saying you need to have a 10 or 20% component of affordable housing in your development?
So
That's the proposal.
the proposal here is that we would be requiring some percentage of affordable housing in every development going forward.
The
I mean, I
housing
think,
committee,
I think if I could just,
Let me ask a question. I mean, Madison has said that they are opposed to affordable housing and they don't allow it. And the state hasn't done anything about that.
No.
Well, and Madison has allowed 4 or 5 830G developments to go through without, without going against them. So I mean,
To be fair, it's really
I'm
hard.
not sure that's germane.
What do you mean?
So,
Go ahead.
I don't
I
mean
would-
to like throw the biggest eagle under the burner, but if you said, okay, you have to have 10% of your units be affordable, how would Eagle View do that?
Yeah, I think one of the important things to keep in mind here, and I will pull up the memo that was crafted by the Affordable Housing Committee. They looked at the towns of Fairfield, the towns of Tolland, the towns of Essex, Bethel. These are all towns which currently have mandatory inclusionary zoning, and they give a stipulation. It could be more than 50 units. It could be more than 10 units. It could be any multifamily development. So we still have the opportunity to dictate what that might be. Perhaps the threshold of 12 units, as you're mentioning, Phil, is not what needs to be done. But we could say more than 20 units, more than 30 units, more than 40 units.
Right, which
I think
is
that's the piece that is, if we could look at the committee's memo, you would see that they really haven't given any of those details. They're just expressing this idea of at least 10% in new multifamily development. And then I think they were deferring to the commission to be able to, fill in those details if you see fit.
And I think what they also were suggesting is some sort of incentive system. If you had 15% affordable, you would get this benefit for having done that. They don't suggest what those might be, but they leave it to us to figure that out.
I think that, from my perspective, you have to make it doable for the development side so that they can do the project and so make it pencil out, so to speak. So I think, to Larry's point, if you give them people, options for greater density or a speedier approval process or something, maybe breaks on the permitting process, the fees, tax breaks, things like that, you might get more people interested in doing it. But I think if you try to just up the percentage, I think you're just gonna drive the actual development process down in general.
Yeah, Jamie and I attended a meeting, I think it was a SCROG meeting, where the fellow from Fairfield was saying he had no trouble, no pushback on 10%, and they were gradually going to 12% and 15%. And his opinion was perhaps we weren't being aggressive enough because the developers were okay with it. Have I recalled that properly, Jamie?
Yeah, and I think, every town sort of walks into it a little bit differently. I mean, Fairfield has been doing this since 2008, and they have taken the path of sort of doing a gradual, increase over time. We spoke to the town planner for West Hartford, and he, they're approaching this through a whole series of incentives, density bonuses, FAR bonuses, site plan or even zoning permit rather than a special permit process. So, we have a lot of tools at our disposal, including the town does have a tax abatement for affordable housing. So I think, if I could draw your attention to this language here from the committee, the committee understands that there are many details to be considered to enact such a request, but stresses the importance of a required 10% set aside at an absolute minimum, with an additional 5 to 10% set aside to be achieved via a sliding scale with a variety of tools, including but not limited to location, density bonus, varied income restrictions, potential fees in lieu, or permitting via site plan. So I think, it's this idea that in order to help us kind of maintain that 2.7% that we're trying to achieve 10% of deed restricted affordable housing units or higher, as we see some potential very large scale developments come to town, we want to just maintain that status quo. And then I think this discussion of, the additional percentage is really, one that the Housing Committee has expressed a desire to analyze a bit more and get some more data on and understand it better. And I hear that from you as well.
I can tell you from my personal experience that density is a big driver. It just, when you start adding in units, it can sometimes offset some of the affordable aspects that you're trying to mitigate.
I just want to add one more part to Jamie's comment. I also just wanted to mention that this is something that's a priority of the current administration in our town. It's been there. The Affordable Housing Committee has been working on the Woodruff project for many years and is looking for other opportunities as well. And also this is also a priority of not only the state, but also a priority of the Scrog area. And we recently had Scrog sent in a facilitator to a group of us to start the conversation of what are all the ways that we could potentially encourage more affordable housing in the town. So obviously it's not 100% of the town thinks that we need more affordable housing, but there is from the years that I've been around, it seems there's a very strong appetite for us to continue to try to have affordability in the South. Workforce, single, there's lots of different areas that means. That means workforce, that means, teachers and firefighters and police. That also means single parent households. That means, the Women's Center is a proponent of this as well. There's just, it comes from a lot of angles. So just.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Because I come from New York City. Are we talking about, let's say we had a 50-unit subdivision and or a 50-unit apartment complex. Are we saying that 10% of the units have to be reserved for affordable housing? Or are we open to the concept that you could have 50 units and you would have to fund 5 additional units at some other location within the town?
Currently what we're talking about is if it's 50 units, then 10% of those 5 of those units would need to be 80% or lower of AMI. That's currently what we're discussing.
Right, but what I'm saying is to go back to Eagle View or one of these other higher end developments. In New York City, what they found is that it's much easier to get developers to buy into this if you can say, okay, we've got a particular site that because of the views or because of the location or whatever, this is a premium site. But we understand there should be affordable housing. And so therefore, we're prepared to fund affordable housing. We're just not going to do it with $1 million views necessarily.
Right. So you're suggesting a fee in lieu of, basically.
Maybe a fee in lieu, or that they would actually buy and build something else, or contract with people who build affordable housing. I mean, there are some NGOs like that around.
Yes.
Who could do that. But I mean, there are 2 aspects. One is that you want the affordable housing in town, but we have to be careful. There are some areas of town where, because of the location of the site, that's a premium area that you could get people to, we could really build the tax base. And there are other areas of town which are convenient and accessible to transportation, et cetera, but may not have the same view or whatever. And those may be more prime for affordable housing development.
Thank you. Glenn, you have a comment?
Yeah, I think communities around the state are grappling with this issue in terms of how to address housing needs. And we're all learning from each other in terms of how this need could be addressed. So there are communities around the state that, as Ted points out, allow for the reservation of units elsewhere in a community. So for example, some communities have what's called naturally occurring affordable housing. The natural sales price is affordable, but they don't count to the state's affordable housing appeals list. If somebody was to buy that unit, put a deed restriction on it and sell it back out, boom, they've met the requirement. Some communities are exploring fees in lieu of affordable housing. Are the regulations that are crafted here, sections 3.6 planned residential development, as Bill pointed out, actually has a density bonus. As you provide more affordable housing, the density bonus goes up. So you get more units per acre. And so this is a way for developers to say, well, hang on, that doesn't pencil out, but this does. And it reflects, on their development. So I think, as Scott points out, maybe the 10% is a starting point. What many communities have said is, listen, if we're not getting the 10%, we as a municipality are falling further and further behind on the state goal, which makes it harder in the future for us to catch up. So let's stop loss today. Let's work on the 10%, be flexible perhaps as to how it's addressed. But I think this is maybe a good example of our list here in terms of questions on the commission's working session today is about the 10%. Elsewhere in the document are some other questions that Jamie and Nigel and I are kind of working through on this. And at the very end, under future projects, is some additional thoughts or ideas on inclusionary zoning. So I don't know that we need to make a decision for all time, but maybe it's a first step, if you will, in providing for this. How can we provide additional incentives? SCROG is doing a great job on research and education, and perhaps we could learn from them as well. So that's what just wanted to share that with the commission.
Yes, Kevin.
But my point here is that I mean, I'm supportive of inclusionary zoning. And I understand that it might be a good idea to be at 12.5 or 15 rather than 10. But I really think that if we want this to be successful, we have to have some provision. And, I don't know technically whether it's a fee in lieu or whether it's, that you require them to develop something else. And because of the deed restriction, it would count. But I think if we're going to do this, we have to have some additional flexibility in there.
Even for just 10%?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, because think about it. Is it really in the town's interest if you've got a really premium site to say that 10% of that site is going to go for affordable housing? Or is it really in the town's interest to say we're going to get the equivalent of 10% but we're going to take that equivalent and put it someplace else so that we can achieve the value to the town? That's my question.
Well, so the other part of this question is, should there be a minimum amount of lots where this gets activated? So for instance, if somebody has 10 acres of land in the R8 and they're just turning it into 2 or 3 lots, would this qualify? Or is 10 units the minimum, or is 20?
I think those kind of scenarios are going to be self-limiting because it just won't work.
Well, that's what, but
I mean, you could write it in there. I kind of agree that it would be good to think of that, but I think just having five, where you have, let's say you have 10 and you have to give up, one, that might work, but if you had 5, you still got to give up 1. It's kind of.
Right. So it seems clear, again, so that's part of the conversation here. Well, shouldn't we just write into it that this only accounts for 10 or more? And therefore, if you're doing 5, then this one, you don't have to worry about it? Or do you?
I think to Phil's point about Eagle View, I don't know the numbers there. I know they're pretty large, but I don't think that you could feasibly. How many units were there? 12?
12.
Yeah, so one would be. Well, I can give you an example of a project I'm working on that is going through similar to 830G. It's called 40B and it's in Massachusetts, but it's 25%, and even at 25% with a larger number, it's still tricky. And I think, if these are multi-million-dollar things, you'd have to. I don't think that. And correct me if I'm wrong, Jamie, that it still has to. The price of the unit has to fit within the 80% category, which would be a vast gap, if I can imagine, between the cost of constructing that. So for example, the units that I'm looking at are 650, but the affordable ones are selling for 170. There's a huge, that's 30% of or 40% of the cost of construction. So I think we have to be aware of how that all ties together and to Ted's point about, not so much the view, but the affordability aspect of it with respect to the cost of or the sale price or the level of the type of project like Eagle View or whatever.
Jamie, Nigel, and I have been working on what other communities have done in terms of approaches to this. And I think getting back to Ted's question originally, I don't think it has to be a literal interpretation that the units have to be on the site. I think it can be a figurative interpretation to say, listen, if we're looking for something proportional, we're looking for, restricting housing so that it will be affordable in the future. And I think we can find examples from other communities where they have allowed housing off-site. They've allowed a payment of fee in lieu of. So if you will, allow us to, I don't know if we're taking an item off the list, Jamie, or adding it on. But,
I think we're taking one off and adding 2, maybe. I'm not quite sure.
Oh, no. Okay.
It's just part of it.
Actually, Glenn, I thought your comment about the taking a property, buying it, deeding it, restricting it, that's probably a really smart trade-off for somebody like Eagle View.
I like that too.
They go find, and the percentages tend to round up. So if you have to be at 25% and you happen to be at 0.5, then it always goes up to the next number. So I don't know how that would, affect it, but they might have been able to create 2 units with that project. And I think that, or they might be able to put money into a fund that would then fund another project that's coming down the road that the town's trying to promote.
Well, and on an individual house, all it would cost them then is the 20% to go from market rate back to 80%, right? That's all it would cost them.
Yeah.
You've got the transactional costs along the way that happen.
Well, sure, there's fees, but yeah, it's about maybe 25% is what it would cost them.
But what Bill's pointing out too is that there may be some renovation cost, right? I mean, if the house needs there's a bathroom leak or that needs to be fixed or something like that, you're going to know what you can sell it for because it's limited by statute. But this is something that I think you can.
Yeah, and I think it would need to be brought up to like current standards of construction for heating, insulation codes, things like that, so that you're not just. Unfortunately, the people that fall into the category of affordable housing end up with some of the least affordable houses to maintain and run. So I think that we should look at that as an opportunity to also improve the housing stock that these folks are going to be in.
So I think Scott, my takeaway, I think, from this conversation is that the commission seems to be inclined to consider this. And I think if Jamie, Nigel, and I put our thinking caps on, maybe even contact Scrog, we can actually come up with a recommendation for an actual regulation language that provides for some of these choices.
Yeah, we've been waiting, Kevin's been waiting to make a comment.
Very patiently.
Okay, thank you. So am I wrong? It's my understanding that when we receive an application that has an affordable housing component attached to it, we lose quite a bit of oversight on that application.
Only if it's a 1030G or 10, whatever, I keep up.
8:30.
8:30.
830G.
Yeah.
830G, then yes, that's correct.
So would that apply to any of
Well,
these that we're talking about?
No,
Okay,
for instance, these are just normal apartments or condos or townhomes that would be coming before us. They want to put 100 on whatever lot. If, for instance, that somebody came before us about that changing the zoning over on Route 1 across from the Strawberry Farms, and they
yes.
had a presentation with like, what was it, like 50 units or something like that. So in this case, that we would just be requiring that they have to do 10% of their 50 would have to be affordable
At 80%.
at 80%, correct?
Hey, Glenn, I have a question for you. I remember towns were trying at one point to sort of create their own sort of half step between 830G and their actual zoning regs. It was called home or something like that. Do you remember that?
Well, there are some other programs that have been developed over the years which do involve slight variations on the process. For example, about 10 years ago, the state created the incentive housing zone program, which was used to create, for example, a development in Old Saybrook. I think it's called Ferry Crossing. You may be familiar with it, and some other developments around the state. I think the issue is that many towns, as Scott pointed out, have become more attentive as to what their affordable housing percentage is. Towns can become exempt by getting to 10% affordable or by getting housing unit equivalent points, which are based on the affordability of units that are being built, et cetera. So you can get moratoria, 4-year moratoria along the way. The key element, I think, for an affordable housing development that Kevin described is that an applicant would need to come in with at least 30% of the units deed restricted to affordable prices. Half of those would have to be affordable at 80% of AMI, and then the other half would have to be affordable at 60% of AMI. So I think, Bill, some of the challenges you were talking about in the development you're familiar with get multiplied a little bit when you're now also building units at 60% of AMI. And
But I
that's
think the
sometimes
trade-off is they get to write their own density.
correct. And that's the issue that towns often do get concerned about, is that,
Right.
there's ways for us to address housing affordability and have it blend in with our vision for our community. It's the units are going to get built anyway, and some of them are going to be affordable,
Right.
or maybe alternate approaches.
Whereas in the case of Hubbard Road, there's no way that they would have been able to build 100 units in an industrial lot unless they had come in with that specific statute.
This is exactly what I was thinking of and prompted my question. So,
Yeah.
so am I hearing you right, Glenn, when you say, so as long as they're proposing less than 30% affordable housing, then we still have the same amount of oversight that we would typically have on any application?
That is correct. The
Okay.
only way a developer gets to 830G powers in terms of not having to comply with local zoning, they have to meet those criteria, which
Okay.
is 30% of the units deed restricted as affordable, and half of them have to be at each of those two levels.
I would like to mention officially to everyone listening that we're not necessarily against that statute.
No.
Especially if they're coming and they're working with us and they're, again, Harvard Road is a great project. But the worry is that someone comes in and is not looking to work with us. They just literally say, this is what
Correct.
I'm doing, and don't work with us at all. And that's what Glenn's mentioning too, is like, well, let's try to incentivize people to come in and do things along the same lines as they're like following as much of our regulations as possible.
That's a great clarification, Scott. Thank you.
And I believe people can ask for waivers, correct, for certain things if they want. Are we allowed to allow that or not?
Waivers is a tough word, Bill, because there is a court case that basically says the only entity that can grant waivers is the zoning board of appeals. It's the functional equivalent of a variance. So I think the issue, there's some discussion and debate on this about how you might write flexibility into the regulation, but I think we've not faced a challenge before in terms of the housing needs that we see in Guilford, in the region, in the state, in the country. So I think we can try to find ways to build in some flexibility. But I think this is where Jamie and Nigel and I were working through this a little bit. And we thought, listen, there's some things we think that we can create regulations for today and be ready for in March or April. And there's probably some other issues that are going to require some additional time. Issues for fee in lieu of affordable housing. There's a couple of towns that are doing it right now. It's a little complicated. And so it might take us a little bit of time to make sure that we think that that could work well in Guilford. So this might be a situation we take a first step, and then in another 3 to 6 months, we'll take another one and continue to work on it as people come up with good ideas about how to make this work.
Yeah, it's interesting you pointed out and educated me on the difference between the ZBA and the P&Z, because in Massachusetts, when you go through the process of their 40B, I was not understanding why I was having to go to ZBA, but now it's clear because they can grant waivers, obviously.
And in their comprehensive permit Massachusetts bill, that's exactly what they do. Connecticut's not quite the same. So I don't know if theirs is better, it's just different.
No, it's different. Yeah, it's definitely, and it's less restrictive. It's 25%. It's 80 between 75 and 80% of medium income and things like that. So it is different, but it also is a little more controlled, I think.
Well,
So
let's see if we could sort of sum up where we are. I mean, I think that at least what I'm hearing is that we're generally in favor of this inclusionary zoning. I think we need to have this issue of flexibility of how they would do it in certain cases, whether it's fee in lieu or that they have to go, it's off-site or whatever. And I understand Glenn's reservations here that these are, these are complicated issues. Personally, I think that we could, if we provide the right kind of flexibility here, we could go north of 10. I don't know whether that's 12 or 15%, but if we had the right kind of flexibility, I could see a bigger number.
Great, thanks. Any other, I think that puts a pretty good bow on it. Yeah, looks like we have a comment from Keith Bishop.
Yeah, hi there, good evening. Yeah, I'm in favor of some affordable housing initiatives that make sense. One of the things we want to have the commission just recognize is part of the charm and the look at Guilford is because of those who have not turned their properties over as of this time. And so those who have already done so have had some economic advantage to whatever way you want to look at it, that don't come under the new potential regulations and restrictions and set-asides that would be coming forward. I think it should be that a certain number of units on a property would then not trigger the affordable housing on smaller sites in particular, and that there is some economic incentives that should be needed based upon what I've seen from other developments that have been done in town in order to have them be good for Guilford and to make economic sense and not have projects sit and churn for a long, long time because the economics don't make sense based upon whatever is going on, whether it's caused by the people that own it or developers or by market conditions that put things on hold. So appreciate your hearing those comments.
Thanks, Heath. Anything else on this topic?
Larry?
Yeah, I just want
Larry?
a clarification. You know, he said that 10% is treading water, but we have a lot of single-family houses, and don't they count towards the total housing stock? And so in the 10% figure, if it only applies to multifamily units,
It doesn't, it applies to all units.
yeah.
Single-family
So I'm just pointing out we have a ton of single-family housing,
Mhm.
and we would need to tread water. We would have to have a mandate of greater than 10%.
Yeah,
Am I
that's what-
thinking about
what
that
Scott
properly?
pointed out.
Well,
I
it
think
includes.
I think going
single-family housing.
forward, Larry, I think you end up in a scenario that we're not falling further behind. I think if for new units being built, everybody is required to provide for the 10%, we will be keeping steady, if you will, in terms of the ratio. I think.
There's also
Yeah.
other ways that this could go. It's not just about new construction, right? So if someone were to create an ADU on their property and then deed restrict that ADU has to be rented at
Mhm.
80% or lower, then that all of a sudden that now counts as a one. And
Yeah.
that counts.
Yeah.
It's all about deed restricting, right? So there's lots of other ways we can do it. If we can find ways to people to
Mhm.
restrict their ADUs, that's a way that we can get some more numbers too. So
Mhm.
not just about new construction, but new construction is, especially with some of the projects that are potentially coming up already. This is a place that people want to build right now. And so that's the other reason why this is coming up. So,
Yeah, well, the other thing is, we're talking about big units, but imagine a lot of people might want to build two-family houses. And so that's increasing stock without having an affordable component necessarily.
correct.
So,
Yep.
right? So yeah, so we need
It's-
to be
not
doing
hard.
things that are encouraging things like you were suggesting, and build those into the regulations.
Correct. It's not hard and fast that if we did 10% inclusionary, it's going to keep us exactly at where we are. That's not a hard and fast rule. It's just in general.
Yeah, okay.
Scott, do you know, is one of the penalties for municipalities who fail to meet the 10% criteria number, is one of the penalties you're no longer able to receive open space grant money from the state?
I don't know the answer to that.
I'd actually heard that.
I'm only aware of the 1030G. That's the only one I'm aware of. And then they encourage you to do a bunch of things as a result of you being below 10. They encourage you to do a affordable housing plan, which we did. They encourage you to, as a town, to do a lot of things.
Okay, no, I had heard that somewhere, that it was one of the penalties, that you would be way down on the priority queue list for.
I'm not sure. Perhaps that's something that Jamie could look into.
Yeah, I could. That's interesting, Kevin. I don't know. I don't know that answer.
I'm not either.
Okay.
Jamie, could you, if this is your screen, could you close it so we can see everybody? I had one last look to see if there's anyone else that has a comment. It's like, no, can we? So then that will move us to the next thing. Next item is number 2. On the subject of accessory dwelling units, in addition to adopting PA 21-29 compliant regulations, which is the one that we discussed last night, consider allowing taller accessory structure in the R1, R2, R3 if the second floor is in the service of an ADU. So basically, this is a garage that has an ADU above it. And this is something that's been championed by, or at least brought to our attention many times by Mr. Russell's campaign, so he might have a comment here. The only question I have is, how does this relate to, and maybe Russ, you could actually speak up, but how does this relate to historical there's reasons why our roofs look how they're supposed to look. There's reasons why our heights are what they are. And I don't know if you could help us maybe put a little summary on it of why we're thinking about this now.
Sure. So currently the height restriction is based on a 15-foot max height. That's what all accessory buildings are in R1, 2, and 3. And when you have a 25-foot wide garage, a 2-bay garage, a a 15-foot height limit basically allows for about a 412, 512 roof pitch. It's very low. And so it's not sort of in keeping with a lot of the development in the town with steeper barn style pitch roofs, which tend to be 812 or even 1212. And so I have over the years probably gotten about 8 or 9 variances for in town or in historic neighborhood variances for additional height in the R3, mostly, sometimes in the R2, to allow for a more historic roof pitch. And that usually falls in the 18-foot height limit, or maybe 19-foot, is allowing for you just to have a more historic roof pitch on a 2-car garage. And that was cumbersome because I was asking for a variance for an aesthetic reason and not for a hardship of any sort. And they were granted mainly because the historic district would write letters of support, and there was no opposition or no seen opposition. But really, as we all know, the Zoning Board of Appeals has been read in every year to stricter and stricter adherence with the law associated with granting variances. And so they've been advocates of trying to correct this situation. And I will say there's no other shoreline town that has a 15-foot height restriction on 3 of the densest zones. It usually is 20 or above, in my experience at least. The other thing that wasn't being applied was the average height on accessory buildings, which has been corrected in the updates as well, which again is an encouragement of a pitched roof rather than a lower pitch flat roof. So the question I guess at hand is, though, if you put a 20-foot restriction on the height and use the 15-foot average that's currently proposed, it's really hard to get living space above a garage because the headroom necessary, getting a stair up and actually having a habitable space, not a garage, the rafter depth for installation requirements now and structural depths for floors, it really makes for a very limited amount of full headroom space on the second floor. That area above sort of 7 feet of headroom would only be about 5 feet, 4 feet wide for the length of the building. And you can dormer it, but with the average 15 foot, you can only dormer 50% of the roof in order to get there. So it's pretty restrictive. You on a say a 550 square foot 2-bay garage, you might only get 200 square feet of full headroom space, 250 square feet of full headroom space on the second floor. So it's not really feasible as an ADU. So the question, I guess, is how do you balance the aesthetic aspects of having an outbuilding that looks appropriate to the neighborhood and has a reasonable, pitch roof and some attic storage, versus whether you're trying to encourage the use of accessory dwellings for use as ADUs, as additional living space on a property. And I will caution, because I had this conversation with Jamie, this falls into a later comment about the removal of FAR, because you just have to, you have to be careful about the bulk of what you're proposing with accessory buildings in particular, if you're removing a FAR, because you're basically saying then all of a sudden, if you give them 25 feet, you can get a full 2-story building on an outbuilding, and that might not be what you want it to look like. So that's, but I guess if you want my opinion, I would go to like 22. If you gave me 22 feet on most sites, I could get some living space on the second floor and keep it looking like a subordinate building. So that would be my comment.
Would you have what about the 15 average?
The 15 average, I mean, you do get dormers up to 50% of the length of the roof under our zone if we update it, so it's like the principal building. Again, I would raise that average with the max, and so I would say I would probably give it another 2 feet as well, 17, 22. They kind of work in proportion to one another in the way in the way I guess we've associated other zones as well.
Thanks, Russ. That's really helpful. Appreciate it. Any comments from commissioners? Thoughts?
Well, I guess I'm puzzled as to what's wrong with a 2-story garage. I mean, why is that, quote, wrong for Guilford?
Well, so at least in the historical district, then there's they have specific ideas of what a garage should look like. Also, we have our architectural, I'm sure our architectural committee would have some comments to try to answer that question too. Jamie?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, no, it's an honest question, Ted. I mean, I think that what we're talking about here is the average and the maximum heights of these accessory structures. And I think that, as Russ articulated for us, you know, the ZBA has been struggling a little bit with the aesthetics of a roof pitch that is only 15 feet, that, you know, that the sort of look of the structure that you get when you only have 15 feet to work with. So we have addressed it. We have raised it to 20 feet in these zones, which I think is good. But this initial question I posed to Russ was, you know, can you really get living space on the second floor of a garage if we're looking to incentivize accessory dwelling units, especially in these zones? You know, is it feasible to get good living space on the second floor of a garage? So it's not so much that the second floor of a garage is bad. It's just more like, you know, what is the wiggle room there? How much more feet could we get and still kind of maintain the aesthetic of these zones? But I think one more thing I do want to say, Glenn, is that just thinking about sort of the space between buildings that we have and sort of the air that comes between our structures in these zones of the R1, the R2, and the R3, which are more dense zones. You know, being able to have that flexibility in an accessory structure may get us a little bit away from having just one hulking structure, right? I don't know if I'm articulating that perfectly, but, you know, when we have an accessory separate or attached structure, we get sort of the sight line, the space, the air between structures, rather than having a more kind of like large, thick hulking structure.
I think, Ted, direct answer to your question is that typically we try to, at least to this point, everyone, though I think a lot of the regulations has been trying to make ADUs look like they're subordinate to the main house. And then part of the reason, if you have if you have a garage with a full story on top of it and then a roof, it starts to look like two houses perhaps on the lot. And I think that's where a lot of this regulation came from.
Is this only for detached garages?
Yeah, this would only be for detached units.
But I mean, okay, Scott, that's helpful, but if you have a two bay garage and it's got a second story to it, I don't think I would mistake it for a second home. I mean, we have a limit on these these second units, that they can only be up to a certain size.
Mm-hmm.
And so
It's subjective. Yeah, it's subjective. It's aesthetics, you know, it's a subjective thing. I don't know if I have a better answer for you than that. Glenn?
Yeah, I was going to ask, I guess, a conceptual question for Russ, given his experience on all of this stuff. So Russ, in all of the other residential districts, an accessory building has a height limit of 20, average 25 to the peak. The R1, 2, 3, it's 15, average 20 to the peak. I mean, what if we just made it 20, 25 throughout town? I don't want to put the R2 and R1, R2, R3 at risk in terms of the overall character, but I think I maybe following up on what Ted was saying, why are we clamping down in the R1, R2, R3? I figure you've got the history on this. You might have a perspective.
Sure. Well, I think it comes from historic growth patterns. I think, you know, the barns were agricultural in nature and often had full second stories in the northern districts. They're also larger in footprint often as well. And so that's historically, I think, why the R4 and above were allowed a greater height. And I think if you looked at historic barn, you know, many of them were larger and higher. The in-town were more carriage house and utility oriented. And, you know, when you go down Fair Street or whatever, most of those barns, there's a few that are 3/4 second story or half knee wall on the second story. But there's very few full 2-story sidewalls within a roof on top. I'm not opposed to that. I think the R2 districts down by the shore, you could run into some people getting a little agitated by second stories, because again, you're taking the FAR away, but they've got significant restrictions on their lot coverage with the 15%. So they have only to go up. And that, I think, is also going to be a controversy that comes forward when you pull out the FAR. You're gonna have two-story. I mean, everybody is going to have a two-story outbuilding because that's the only place they can put space, and everybody is going to have a three-story house. Yeah, I'm the pressures and the land values and, you know, and such, and the cost of construction, everybody wants to max out what they have. And so I'm just, how those things balance is just my concern. The in town, where you really want the ADUs, in my opinion, I think the 25-20 is probably a safe bet, and would encourage, I think, some additional housing units in the center of town over garages. And I think the lots are a little bit larger and have a little bit more space. And, you know, with the 20% lot coverage, you won't be forcing people to only go up. But you know, so I would, that's you know, as that I would maybe draw a line between R1, R2, or maybe actually just R2, which is primarily the shoreline district. R1 is in town and kind of around, and much of the, you know, that again, I think would be okay.
Okay, thank you.
Any other thoughts from commissioners on this one? What's the feeling about going up in those districts?
I'm in favor of it.
Do we feel like we need to talk to the architectural committee about it, or is it just maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should give it some consideration. I am sort of, Russ is raising some questions for me about, you know, our coastal site plan application and our coastal area management regulations. And I just want to kind of go back into that and look at this question you're raising about FAR. And I think maybe give that some more consideration. I was happy that we had gone with the changing the max height from 15 to 20. I think I have heard from several individuals and architects and even homeowners that this extra space of 22 would be helpful. But I would just like to kind of go back and look at a few more things before giving 25 a full blessing.
Okay, Russ.
Okay, can I ask, what is a FAR? I apologize for my ignorance.
No, that's a great question. FAR stands for floor area ratio, and it's a way to compare the sort of the bulk of a building, its floor area, to the site that it sits on. So for example, if you had a one-story building over an entire site, that's an FAR of 1 because the floor area is the same as the site. But you could also get a floor area of 1 with a 10-story building on 10% of the site. So it's a way to think about overall development size relative to the area of the parcel. And I think, you know, I know Madison uses this, I think, effectively in the shoreline areas to sort of moderate the size of buildings that you can build. But it's a just like a lot coverage regulation, it's another way to look at the intensity of use on a site.
And we currently have an FAR that's double the lot coverage. So if you have a 15% lot coverage, you can have 30% lot coverage, and 20% is 40% FAR. That now is being proposed potentially to be removed from the zoning, so there wouldn't be any total floor area limitations. I just wanted to end and say that I do think that 2015 is enough to aesthetically make reasonable appearance buildings in the R1 and R2, and then I do encourage going a little higher in the R3, and just from my own experience, I think that also would fit in, having served on the historic district for a while, would fit into their desires as far as the in-town properties to have more, a little bit more scale to or vertical scale to the outbuildings.
Okay, thanks, Russ. So I think, Jamie, the answer to this question is that we are in general in favor. We certainly want to check on the things that you want to check on.
Yeah, just sort of, I'll move it to the laundry list of staff things.
Okay. Do you want to give us a little bit of, the next item is related to conservation development, conservation development for subdivision. Could you just give us a quick little background?
Yeah, I can. So interestingly, when we discussed this in the sustainability information session, I think it was in August, I've lost track now. There was a real interest in this type of development moving forward. So sort of clustering and reserving some of the natural growth space of a parcel. And there were some questions. I think Ted had asked some questions about why would a developer want to do this, and how do we think about, if this is a development pattern that we'd like to see, how do we begin to think about making this something that developers would want to do. So I wanted Glenn to take some time to kind of walk us through that, but more importantly, and it's a little bit of a nuance, we're thinking about changing the name of this section, removing the name of subdivision and changing it to development. I don't know if you all kind of kept track of it, but we've sort of put the subdivision regulation revisions on hold. We do have to do some work on our town's road ordinance before we can really move forward with that. So we've put that part of this overhaul on hold. And it's something that we can, in future and will in future revisit. But it seemed as though there was an interest in this type of conservation development and kind of, keeping it within the zoning regulations as an option. And then also just having a discussion about perhaps tweaking the language to make this something that would be appealing to a developer.
I'm gonna share screen here, and this is the illustration. Bear with me for a second here. So conservation development is really a situation where in most normal types of development, the regulations get caught up in minimum lot area, minimum buildable area, particular setbacks, lot coverage, and other things. Oftentimes what a developer cares about mostly is, well, how many units am I going to end up getting? So conservation development type of approach often turns the development process on its head a little bit and says, in our regulations, the proposed regulations here for Guilford say that we're going to look at the overall area of the parcel. We're going to take out some sensitive resources like wetlands, water courses, steep slopes, floodplains, etc. We're going to apply a density factor related to the zoning district, and that's how many house sites a developer would get. And then we say, lay them out on the parcel the way that you think works best. So there aren't frontage requirements. So oftentimes the developer might find ways to cluster in little pockets of the property where there's scenic amenities or little nooks and crannies for the homes. Oftentimes the amount of road that would get built would generally be less. The infrastructure costs are lower. And so when developers are penciling out their projects, they'll look at it and say that this is more attractive in the marketplace. It preserves important resources which the community cares about, and perhaps they might save money on infrastructure costs. The regulations that are proposed for Guilford indicate that at least 50% of the parcel should be preserved as open space. So in exchange for this flexibility, we get a chance to have open space areas which can protect our sensitive wetlands or steep slopes or scenic views or other factors. And the regulations encourage that type of approach. So that's what a number of communities have found with regard to conservation development. Jamie and I talked about changing the name to conservation development rather than conservation subdivision, because it can be a common interest community. It doesn't have to be lots. But the general idea is it's a more flexible approach to development that doesn't result in more lots than the land can support. The density is related to the zoning district it's in, but gives considerable flexibility on how those home sites might be laid out. So wetlands could be avoided, or scenic areas. There could be opportunities for lots to be clustered creatively around scenic views and things like that. So that's the approach, and that's the attractiveness that other communities have found.
Thanks, Glenn. Any thoughts or questions from commissioners on this one?
Well, I think that as Glenn has articulated it, it's certainly a worthy idea. I think what we have to be careful about is how we implement this, because the first draft, that at least the draft that I looked at, when I tried to pencil that one out, it was very, very negative to the developer. And, if that's what this results in, then nobody will do this. So we have to have this in a way that it works for the developer. And I'm not sure, how to do that, but I mean, I understand the idea and I like the idea, but it's got to be practical. We can't combine it with a whole bunch of other restrictions so that at the end of the day, it doesn't work.
Glenn, as currently drawn up, is that taken from other towns that have this in place? Is that
Yeah.
what it came from currently?
Yeah, so I think the development process that's outlined in this regulation was the subject of considerable discussion with George and Aaron, and the current regulations that Guilford had weren't really addressing the things that the community seemed to care about. Were there other approaches? And I suggested this type of approach for consideration. And again, a developer would approach this and say, okay, I have a certain size parcel of land. Some of those areas of that parcel aren't buildable. They're wetlands, water courses, steep slopes, and floodplain. I can't count those. Then you take a density factor, which is based on the minimum lot size. You multiply the two numbers together. That gives you the number of lots. The only other requirement then for a developer is that the town, as part of this, is looking for 50% of the parcel to be preserved as open space. How you configure that, whether it's greenway parcels, wildlife corridors, pollinator pathways, trails, whatever, it could be up to you. But it could also preserve the scenic aspects of a road corridor. Generally for communities that I've worked in, there's been very positive feedback from developers, from communities in terms of the end result. There's some communities that consider requiring this in terms of, new development. And there's other communities that make this a developer option because it is attractive. And there can be certain parcels, I think smaller parcels wouldn't really work well for this. Certainly perhaps in-town locations might not work well, but I remember conversations in Guilford in the past about a fairly large subdivision on the eastern side of town. And the concern is that the regs in effect weren't really going to produce the best result, but perhaps something as flexible like this could. I think that's the spirit, is that a developer can look at this and, configure their development appropriately.
So Glenn, in towns that have actually required this, have those towns incurred any kind of legal ramifications? Any legal problems with that kind of mandate?
Not that I'm aware of, Kevin. I mean, I think that posing that question is probably a great question for what we refer to, Jamie, Nigel, and I, as the listserv. all planners in Connecticut are on a listserv and they just post questions and get answers. And I think that this could be an area that we could explore that. Not
Yeah, I mean,
not that I'm aware of.
So there's no lawsuits yet have come about from any of those towns that are requiring it to actually have a mandate in place.
Not that I'm aware of, Kevin. I mean,
Okay, well, that's good.
I can't keep track of all 169, but
No, I understand. No,
I mean, I think this is something that I discussed briefly with our environmental planner, Mr. Kevin McGee. You know, that like maybe this is the way to sort of do subdivision or new development creation moving forward. And we both had some questions about whether we, you know, could do this or whether we would have to still allow conventional subdivisions. And so I think that's you know, that's kind of an analysis that still needs to be done. And we could always start with Chuck, or perhaps Attorney Shansky could weigh in on the
oh,
discussion.
that might be someone who knows. Yep.
Good evening, everybody. Hi, y'all. Hello, Glenn. I'm only weighing in because I'm involved in an appeal right now on a conservation development downstate where it's a meaningful and terrific goal, but the outcome in this case did not avoid developing in the least auspicious place for purpose of the conservation goal. So it's not just a matter of the calculation that gives you the lot yield, but also some intrinsic protection that makes sure that the resource that is the object of the tool is actually protected. And because Guilford has such a great natural resources inventory, wetting the information that you have from there and getting the requisite restrictions in place might yield a very happy outcome. And then I would also only say that I have seen modest density bonuses for conservation development because of the restriction that may be inherent in the leaving something alone. But the salutary effect of leaving something alone is of value to the town. So good luck with that. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Thanks, Marjorie.
Is there a link to that? A link to get information on that case that you're talking about, Marjorie?
I'll give it to you offline.
Thank you.
I think Jamie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe part of the reason why we were interested in having Glenn having this be in part, I believe part of why Aaron and George were talking about this was because there was a feeling that the open space subdivision regulation wasn't really yielding developments like we were hoping, and this another way to do the same thing.
Yeah, honestly, I'm not sure on this one. I know that there has been a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to our latest open space subdivision along Long Hill Road there. The first selectman and I have a meeting in the new year with a newly organized group that is interested in addressing some removal of our natural spaces due to development. So I'm really not sure if the open space subdivision just isn't cutting it. And this is where this came about. Glenn, maybe you could help us more with that. But, you know, this seemed like,
to my knowledge, there's only been one open space development.
Right. So yeah,
since it came into play.
Yeah.
I remember there were discussions again about a large parcel on the east side of town and when it was developed or would be developed. But that conversation goes back, you know, quite some time. I guess it may even go back. I think in 2004, I worked on the smart growth strategies for Guilford, and it could have been part of that conversation. So it's from long ago. One of the things that Marjorie mentioned, which I think is important to state, is that there are alternative variations of these types of regulations. And some communities have adopted regulations where they identify certain types of resources as primary resources and other types of resources as secondary resources. And that doesn't mean that they're not as important as each other, but the regulations go on to state that you have to do an environmental analysis of the property, that the primary resources shall be open space unless the commission allows you to exempt those or, you know, leave them in lots or do other things with them. And the secondary resources should be preserved as open space. What you now do is you send a clear message to the developer that, listen, the wetlands or the other areas which are identified are areas that we're defaulting to preserve these, leave these alone. And that may address the issue that Marjorie described. So there's other possible avenues here. And so if the commission feels that a conservation development approach is advantageous compared to your current regulations, but if there are some shortcomings, then we can add some additional provisions in addressing this. I think my knowledge is I think the first time as part of working on the regs, we actually talked about this section. So it's kind of exciting. And I think if the commission says, yeah, we like this, give it some more tools. I think, yeah, darn, Jamie, is that another item on our? I'm kidding. But I think that we can certainly add that information in if the commission is desirous of that.
Marjorie, you had one more comment, and then we'll get Russ's.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I do. It was back in the early parts of the 2000s, when I believe Fran Armentano was the planner in Granby, and I believe I heard him describe that the open space subdivision was the as of right subdivision in Granby, and if you wanted to do a conventional subdivision, you had to get a special permit. And that was to encourage contiguous open space and getting something more utilitarian than fragmentation.
Thank you.
And that's called their flexible residential development reg, Margie. So good memory.
Russ?
Yes, two things. One, actually, most of podunk development was done under the open space. It was an earlier iteration, but most of those were done as open space. That's why they're mostly 2-acre lots as opposed to 4-acre lots in the R8. But so it was heavily used. I think the economy is what really shifted that. But the other thing that I've seen is actually the difficulty of getting someone to hold the open space easements became a lot more difficult. It used to be that I guess it was I don't know who, but basically it became very difficult to find someone actually to hold the easement on smaller parcels or ones that are more segmented and smaller subdivision parcels that were looking for open space easements that needed to be held by someone. So that was, I know, an impediment that became an issue on some of the smaller subdivisions that were approaching it that way. And then back to Ted on this, I mean, just take the R6, your density is 0.5 lots per acre. So that's basically a 2-acre lot where the underlying zone under the current subdivision regs is only 1.5 acres for the R6. So, and then you're saying under the current regulations, you're able to count everything currently. You're able to count wetlands and steep slopes and that sort of thing. That's not removed. And then under this new proposed is taking all that out. So you're significantly reducing the density of a lot under this zone. And I don't know if that was purposeful or any analysis was done, but it seems a disincentive. So the most vulnerable lots or subdivision potential lots that have the most wetlands and the most, maybe habitat are going to be the ones least desirable to put into this. And I just think that needs to be worked out, obviously, if you want to encourage people to utilize this for the best, the most valuable environmental lots. So I just
Russell, that is exactly, now you pinned down why I was concerned about this. Because when you pencil this through, this change going from the way it's worded, it's a big disincentive to do this.
So I've done quite a bit of this over the years, and I think, as Russ points out, there is math that goes into this in terms of a parcel. So in communities in the past, I haven't done this analysis probably in the last 10 years or so. But if you actually look at the size of a piece of land, the zone that it's in, and the number of lots that result from a subdivision, and look at what the resulting density is, the numbers actually do come out close to what the density factor is. What we tend to forget when we analyze subdivisions is that no parcel is perfectly configured for the actual lot dimensions that are required. So there's what we call configuration loss that happens in a subdivision. The road standards are somewhere between 5 and 10% of the land area of most subdivisions, because we forget how much area gets chewed up by a 50-foot wide right-of-way that goes into the roadway system. On top of that, we have the open space set-aside requirement, which I don't recall off the top of my head what that is in Guilford, but perhaps it's another 5, 10, 20% of the parcel that gets preserved as open space because it's required in the subdivision regulations. So when you actually sit down and actually look at what you can do with the conventional design versus what you can do with the math, in other communities I've worked in, the goal was to come out neutral so that we weren't affecting people's development rights. I think some communities do what I call a two-plan approach, which is they require somebody like Russ to sit down and design it out as a conventional subdivision, do all your perk testing to prove that you can actually build lots there, and we'll approve the number of lots that you come up with. And now you've got to go and engineer and design a new subdivision using a conservation approach. And what many communities have found is developers don't want to go out and do double perk testing, double analysis on any of this stuff. And so the math just makes it easy. And I'm a little spoiled in this because a number of years ago, I was the town planner in Avon, and Avon's used the density factor for years. And this is the way the math works. And it's I wouldn't say it's perfect, but it worked extremely well. So I think there is math that goes into it, Russ, I think in terms of what it works out to be. But the goal is to be neutral. And so these density factors here, based on my experience in other communities for that factor. So I'm not asking you to, take my word for it type of thing, but if you just take a piece of paper and sketch some things out or whatever and figure out the other factors, if you think the numbers could or should be adjusted, my goal for you would be to recommend something that's neutral. Our goal is not to slow down or impede development. Our goal here was to try to be more environmentally sensitive about the land, to preserve the resources that people care about. So I'm comfortable recommending this type of approach. And I think we need to get the factors and the density factors right to make that happen.
Any other thoughts or comments? Right now it's 9:15. Should we try one more, Jamie?
Well, I mean, Scott, so let me just kind of lay it out. I feel as though the landscaping, the sidewalks, those are maybe, I feel like we might have done a good job at those, and those might be more laundry list items that we just need as staff to check out. The commercial zoning is a doozy. I got to be honest. I spent most of today creating an Excel spreadsheet for, a comparison table, taking our, uses in the commercial districts and looking at those, perhaps.
Assuming that we might not finish it, but I think it's worthwhile to at least
start it. Sure.
Introduce it to all of us.
Yep, I'm happy to kind of walk everybody through it, show you what I.
See if we at least all understand and
Can we at least set a stop time?
Yes, and we can set a stop time for 9:30. I'm happy to do that. Thank you. So basically, for those of you that hung out on the Route 1 zones session that we held a little while ago, I sort of exhaustively went through all of our newly proposed zones. So just to take, for example, if this would carry with me, maybe that isn't the best example.
maybe the two industrial ones.
Yeah, so I think this business mixed use district is a good one. So originally when I did the comparative tables here, I was trying to show that if we listed all of our uses that we currently have in the business and commercial zones, what sort of the existing zones were, and then what the newly proposed or merged zone would allow. So we did kind of go through that. So just to go back to the very beginning of this effort with the zoning regulations, we had something like 22 business and commercial zones And the effort was really to try to consolidate that. And I think the last time we spoke, we were comfortable with doing the consolidation. We just needed to, kind of understand a little bit more what the result of that consolidation looks like. So I tried to, utilizing this new table, which in the Excel spreadsheet that I've shared on the website for you all to look at. Basically, I'm calling this the new zones merger. And to simplify, I've just taken the zones along Route 1. So the new zones along Route 1, after we kind of consolidate, are the business mixed use district, the Post Road Business 1, Post Road Business 2, Post Road Business 3, Post Road Business 4, and the shopping center district. So this is kind of the result of the merger, and these are only the zones along Route 1. So this is removing the marine commercial and the industrial, and I think we have, I think that's it. So what I did is I tried to list all of the zones in column A as they are worded in the new regulations. It's just really wordsmithing. We haven't changed any zones. And then I tried to just sort of highlight a couple of things. I wanted to show how things are across the board. If we take, for example, medical and dental clinics, in all of these new zones, all along Route 1, they are site plan approval. So that's sort of one element of this chart, is showing you all the different zones and how they are approving or permitting, I guess I should say, these different uses. The other element, which starts to get, a little bit interesting, is if we look at, so it's in our commercial zones where we offer the opportunity to do multifamily, and we have dwelling units that are allowed per acre in these zones. And we have transitioned in the new regulations to approving these via special permit. Whereas in the past, dwelling units in these zones before they were merged were approved or permitted through a process of site plan. So a site plan versus a special permit. So this red is meant to indicate where we have gone from a site plan approval to a special permit approval. Okay.
Is that due to the merging of some other zones?
Well,
No, that's not what's happened. What's happened is every time we've had a choice between a site plan and a special permit, the special permit won.
Correct.
If you were merging
That's
two
true.
together and one was one and one was the other, you went to the
We
special
went to the
permit.
special permit.
They went
And I
the
think-
more
and I think
restrictive.
I think that's what we need to talk about, because the special permit for every single thing that we're dealing with. I mean, it sounds good, but there's a cost to the town, and because it's a cost to the potential developer of going to a special permit. And do we really need to do that in every single case where there was a conflict between the merged districts?
Well, and I think that's part of the purpose of why Jamie's put this together. It's not only those conflicts, but also maybe every one of them was in agreement that it was special permit for a certain item, and maybe we look at it and we think, well, maybe it actually could be a site plan.
So Jamie, what is your
Maybe they-
thought between? Go
So
ahead.
I think the Jamie putting this together is so that we can kind of do our homework and
correct.
go through and say, okay, well, we don't think it should be a site permit for dwelling units. We think it should be a site plan instead.
But was there a thinking behind your decision to make it a special permit, or was it just that it always defaulted to the more restrictive?
I'm going to kick that to Glenn because these decisions came about before my time.
It was the default.
Yeah, it was a default, Bill. I think we were looking back on the number of zoning districts that the commission had and realizing that there were subtle nuances between the various districts. We felt there were some significant opportunities from merging them. part of our goal was not to make existing uses non-conforming. And so on the dimensional standards, we defaulted to the most relaxed standards so that nobody would violate a side yard setback or something else. We felt that this would be the way to provide some flexibility and opportunities on site, but not make people non-conforming as a result of this intention here. Then on the uses side, we realized that there were some differences between the various zoning different districts being combined, and that realistically, it was hard for us to say to the commission, well, this site's fine here, but maybe not so much over there. So we defaulted to a special permit situation there, again, trying to be respectful of the commission and people's uses and activities on site. And we, as staff, didn't feel like we had the ability to just replace a special permit with a site plan. I think as Scott points out, maybe that's something that you guys could or should be doing homework on and say, you know what, we really don't have an issue with self-storage facilities in the Post Road 4 business district or something like that. And then I think Jamie, Nigel, and I can certainly take care of implementing that, but putting our judgment in for yours, I don't think this is the type of thing that we could put this on a consent agenda for you. But I think there could be considerable discussion. So if you can give us some guidance on this, that would be very, very helpful.
So if I'm looking at this chart, it tells you that your dwelling units need to have a special permit, but it determines the number you can have per acre already. Is that correct? So if we're allowing a certain number per acre, why are we requiring a special permit?
Well, I think this was, again, there's not residential units weren't allowed in all districts. And as part of our work on the regulations, the commission had talked about that concept of doing this. And the general default density was 6 units per acre.
So in reading this table, let's take that example, the dwelling units for that area. There's one that's not red. That means that one was in agreement. It was on special permit. All the other ones were site plan.
Correct.
And they got changed to special permit. So if it's red, it means it was a site plan and it got changed to special permit just because of the default.
Correct. And there was also an interesting thing in the units per acre. So in the merger, all the merged zones that became the business mixed use district, they were 4 units per acre and they got bumped to 6. Whereas in the old PV1, there were 8 units per acre and it got moved to 6. So that's also an indication here in the chart that I'm trying to show.
Yep. So that's what the colors are trying to
yeah. And the only other area, I mean, yes, I think this is, not just because I spent a bunch of time on it, but just there's a lot of information here. So,
well, that's a
please
good reason.
give a look. But, another area was interestingly around schools. So, we've actually moved them all to special permit rather than site plan. So, I think there's a lot of information here, and it's worth having a look at, both for, are we treating all the zones along Route 1 consistently? But also, do we seem to be looking at certain uses through special permit versus site plan that we weren't in the past? What I will say is that just a reminder that the Route 1 corridor is really the area that we have identified for our affordable housing plan and achieving our affordable housing units. So therefore, perhaps this notion of dwelling units being a special permit, getting to our earlier discussion about any of the ways that we may offer incentives for those affordable housing mandates that we're looking to achieve, how we permit multifamily housing could be one of those avenues. And then lastly, I do want to highlight that I think, Larry, you had mentioned this idea of mixed use development and how we are incentivizing or not incentivizing mixed use development. So this is a use in all of these commercial zones along Route 1, and it is currently permitted via site plan.
So to sort of go along with Ted and to channel Sean, I think it's always better to make it as simple as possible for every aspect of the planning and zoning process. So I would think it would be best to have as few examples of special permit as possible.
Yeah, basically the activity that we all should probably do for ourselves is go through the list of uses and have an idea of, I think this should be a special permit, or I think this should be a site plan, and then compare notes, honestly.
Okay, that's a good idea.
That's probably the easiest way to go.
Jamie, where is this table? Where do we find
This
it?
table lives in the materials section, so if you go to the
today.
Planning and Zoning Commission agenda website, I'm happy to walk. It's probably a good idea for me to walk the public through that too, if anyone.
Would
was-
it be possible to just send it to us?
Yes, yes.
No,
I can
you
do
gotta
that
go
too.
find it, Bill.
Oh my God. I have enough trouble finding the Zoom link.
I know. Yeah.
The last thing I'll mention
Um,
for clarity's sake is that if there's an X or if it's blank, that means that it's not allowed in that unit.
It just means that it's not currently.
There must be like somewhere up above, like a chart that tells you what the things are, like the X's and the O's.
I didn't. That's the one that I missed that part. I didn't put it in
Right.
the legend.
I just for clarity, I want to make sure everybody was aware that that's what that meant.
Yeah. So again, I mean, just for those of you that I will not be emailing this to directly, if you can navigate to the town's website, when you get the drop down for boards and commissions, if you then navigate to the Planning and Zoning Commission, I'll do that and we can all follow along. You'll see this click here for View Planning and Zoning Commission Agenda and Minutes. That's going to bring you to what I refer to as our Agenda Center. Nigel has uploaded the current working full draft of the current regulations here under this hyperlink. Again, you'll see this sort of proposed schedule to adoption. And then right here, Larry, under the 12/22/22 zoning regulations rewrite, this
Yeah.
materials will get you
Right,
there.
actually, I found it, but then I
Okay.
tried to download it and I had to sign in with some kind of password or,
Oh, okay.
so,
So I will,
if you can
yeah.
make it easier to download, like the other.
absolutely. And I can send it to you, and any member of the public who would like this, feel free to send me an email.
And by the way, this is far better than it was a while ago. Define things. It's very easy now. I just thought if you could email it, it'd be super easy.
Okay. Great. Anything else you want us to know or think about when we're going through this, Jamie?
One thing I'd like you to sort of leave us with is, Nigel and Glenn and I are just, doggedly continuing to work on our laundry list of things. But these sort of remaining elements, particularly this one for the commercial zones, would you like to address it in perhaps the January 18th meeting or the January 4th meeting, or schedule another working session? What is your sense for how we're doing?
I think we could.
I like the working sessions just because it's clearly just what we're working on.
I think this would be helpful as a working session because there's a lot to go over on this issue.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're on board with helping you guys push this over the end line. It's not just all on you.
And maybe just set a timeline so that you can plan around the working session so that you know if you should eat before or after.
Always eat before.
Always eat before. or during, but
Or during, Ted.
I also believe in that.
Glenn, you have a comment?
Yeah, just real quick. I mean, I think at this point in time, we're headed for a public informational meeting in January. I think Jamie, Nigel, and I have been pushing to get the regulations up to date so that people would see the regulations. But I also think we have an obligation to the public to have enough time to review the regulations. So I think we haven't done this yet, but I think Jamie, Nigel, and I may just call a certain date of regulations. We're going to go to public informational meeting. For example, as we were just looking at the website, the most up-to-date draft, I think there was 12/14. We may go to informational meeting with the 12/14 version. We're going to go with our updated tracking list, which we've talked through a little bit this evening. We'll continue to work on that. And we may identify maybe a couple of other things that, are still in the works. But in other words, the regulations for the January public meeting may not be a picture perfect set of the regulations we're going to go to public hearing with. We're moving in that direction, but we also want to give the public enough time and understanding of all of the things that we are working on. But I think their input will still be helpful on that. So I think Jamie
Agreed.
and Nigel and I will continue to work on that.
Yeah, I
Agreed.
mean, thank you. One of the other things I'd like to get your feedback on, several months ago, I was sort of gung ho for hosting this public information meeting at the community center. I just don't know if that appetite is there, honestly. I'm going to try to work with our public information specialist out of the First Selectman's office to try to get this information, in the paper and publicize it. And that's going to have to happen basically the first week of January, just to give everybody enough time. And I'm really, looking for some advice. Do you think that people would turn out for an in-person meeting? Do you think they're tired of hearing us talk? Do you think they want to do it virtually?
Well, I would point out that now that we're talking about having 2 informational meetings, I would definitely suggest that both of them don't need to be in person. That at least one of them could be Zoom exclusive and one of them could be in person, perhaps.
Okay.
I'm not against meeting in person myself, but I don't know. I don't know.
If it was June, I would be more, comfortable with it, but
Don't get me in trouble, Bill. Don't mention June. I'll go to April, but I'm not going to.
No,
I'm not going to June.
I'm just saying from the type of season now is the flu and
I
the,
know
and
that's
the whole,
that was my.
there's so
thinking.
many, I can't tell you the number of people now that I know who have croup, flu, that other thing that I can never remember the 3 letters of, MSR or something like that.
RSV.
Yeah, anybody with little kids knows this one. And then COVID, I mean, I know it's like every day I'm getting, our whole Christmas dinner is out the window now, so.
Well, okay, so maybe we can work towards an additional working session sometime in January before the public information meeting. Are we feeling that?
Yep.
Okay.
Sure.
So Glenn and Nigel and I will work on that. We'll move forward with the January 26th public information meeting as a virtual meeting. And then I think I'll stop there with my scheduling, but it sort of seems like, maybe another information meeting in February, and now we've bumped everything about a month, but.
Right, because to Glenn's point, that if we meet before the January 26th, whatever we talk about during that working session is not going to be incorporated.
Yeah, we can't.
Talked about at the January 26th meeting, so it makes sense to have one in February to then put everything together.
I think we can create a little flyer, Scott, that
Yeah,
just,
sure.
like up, breaking news or something like that. And just again, to keep people informed as to what's going on. So I think
Yep.
again, Nigel and Jamie and I will work on that.
Yep, great.
Great,
Great
thank you
meeting.
so much. This was really productive. Thank you.
Really good meeting.
Very
Yeah.
much.
All right,
Excellent.
Terrific. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Nigel.
thanks everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Have a great night.
okay.
too.
Good night, everybody.
Good holiday.
Happy
Happy
holidays.
holidays.
Yeah.
Holidays.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you from the One Public.
No, Ken was on too.
I was. Yeah, I think that, they're,
Ken.
yep.
Hi.
That's the
Just
frustrating
listening.
part here. How do you get more people involved?
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.